Monday, December the 10th to order. Roll call.
Mr. Hogan, Mr. Bush,
Here.
Mr. Kerrigan,
Here.
Mr. Driver, Mr. Masters,
Here.
Ms.
Here.
Metcalf.
Here.
Okay, so I assume we have no minutes from the last meeting?
No.
Okay, so we have basically two things to go over tonight. The first, we had some changes to the future land use element that were made last week. So what we need to do is to look over those elements and make sure that we're happy with them. Everything else we've approved here, except the future land use. So if we go with the future land use tonight and everything looks good, then we can go ahead and transmit the entire comp plan to the board tomorrow. So that's our first goal tonight. The second thing we need to do tonight is that the people that are going to be doing the new LDR have asked us for some input. So what I've done is I've gone in and I've sat on the board for the last 2 years, and generally I'm very familiar with the questions that keep coming up. It's the things in the LDR that people want to change or want clarification on. So those are the things that we're going to go over tonight. And when we do go over those, I've tried to get as many citizens in here, residents, landowners, or what have you, to comment on them, because I think that both the comp plan and the LDR should reflect the consensus of the community. So that's why I want to give y'all an opportunity to comment on this stuff tonight before the LDR is written, and then you find something in it you don't like, and then you want to, talk about it at that time. So we can't really address the LDR until we've got the comp plan complete. So basically all we have to do tonight is to ask the board members if they've looked over the changes that have been made, if they're happy with them. If they're happy with them, then we can go ahead and make a motion to accept it the way it is, and then generally accept the comp plan the way it is, and then we can go ahead and transmit that to the board tomorrow. So what I'd like to do is go right through the board. We'll start with Jack. Jack, have you had an opportunity to review the changes that have been made, or are you happy with them?
I have, and I'm happy with it.
Okay.
I'm fine with it.
Laura, okay, I am not. Okay, I refer you to page 1-1, policy 1.13, section B. There's a spelling there. Commercial uses shall mean activities of land, within land areas which are predominantly connected with the scale, which should read sale, rental, and distribution of products. So that needs to be changed. On page 1-6, E, general commercial, paragraph 2, line 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This was a change that Linda suggested last week, and it deals with applying the 50% rule as to whether or not we're going to allow non-conforming structures in areas that they were not intended for. And although this addresses an immediate problem the city has, it doesn't do anything to address a continuing problem we've had at least as long as I've been on the board, and one I foresee going on in the next few years. And for those of you that were in when we discussed allowing residential in the general commercial areas, it's the same problem I have with this that I had with that. And for the members of the community that weren't here then, let me go over that briefly.
What page are you on, Jim? I'm sorry.
Page 1-6,
Thank you.
F2, 6th line down.
We are in the way.
No, you're not in the way. Okay. So basically, the 50% rule applies, and we've got to determine whether or not we're going to allow the people that have got residential homes, and I'm talking here of single-family dwellings that are currently built in the general commercial zone to rebuild under the new code. The problem that exists right now is that there is no general commercial space left for businesses to come into Mexico Beach. If you look at the land use map up here, excuse me, on the wall, everything in red is property that has been designated as general commercial. Everything in the black is general commercial property which is already occupied. which basically leaves about 4 areas in the city where a business can go legally. You've got the area over here on 15th Street, and about where the areas that are still in the red. And if you go any further than 50 meters back in that area, you run into swamp. You've got no way to get back in there. So no businesses want to go in that area. The other 3 areas that remain are some small areas here just to the east of Killer Seafood on the canal, and further down on 98, and that's it. Those are the only business areas left in Mexico Beach. If you look at the areas that I've got highlighted in pink, okay, those are all areas where there's some form of residence currently existing. The areas that remain in black are businesses. So there's not a whole lot of business here right now. And in order for a community to be successful, it has to have some kind of business, because that's what produces the revenue that the city runs off of. For every dollar that the city gets in revenue from a business, they spend less than $1 in services to those businesses. For every dollar they get in from taxpayers, they pay well over $1 out in services to those people. So if we want to try and balance the books, somewhere down the road, we've got to entice businesses in here. And one way to get the businesses in here, because the people that had built in those areas are already grandfathered in. Under Florida law, okay, they're no longer grandfathered once more than 50% of their property has been destroyed and they have to rebuild. So we have the opportunity here to say, okay, your grandfather is out. If you're going to build on this property, you have to build some kind of business. And under the new comp plan, you can build a business with a residence only if the residence is vertically over the business itself, business over itself. So that leads us to other problems. The city is in need of revenue now. And if you allow people to build where they were building before with their residences, then they'll get that revenue in right away, and it's not something we're looking at further down the road. Okay, you also have the problem of expectations of the landowners, those people that bought this property thinking no hurricane's ever going to come here, I'm not going to have to worry about my property being destroyed, are going to expect to be able to rebuild under the new code. So that's their expectations. Okay, so the bottom line is we've got conflicting problems here. We've got the need for immediate revenue plus the need to fix the commercial problem we have right now where no businesses can come in because there's nothing available for them. So those are the things, you know, that I'm looking at. I don't have a real problem with the way that paragraph is written. I just think it's something that we need to discuss before we go out, because as far as I know, and I've lived here for 15 years, the city has never had a business plan in place, or they've never had anybody sit and look at business in general. Every time somebody came in and asked for a variance so they could build their house or their condominium or whatever it was they wanted in general commercial, the city council and us as a planning board looked at it in a microcosm and didn't consider how it would affect the whole city. And now 20 years later, we've got a situation where we've got nothing but residences and no possibility of bringing a business in. So that's one way to bring businesses in. So what I'd like to do is ask if anybody in the public has any comment on this. If you do, identify yourself by name and address, and then say what it is you've got to say.
I want you to explain to me 121 Pine Street, Mexico Beach, Judy McCormick. What is this thing about the people are grandfathered in and now their houses are ruined?
Okay, under the law, if the city has issued a variance, okay, as long as the landowner that bought that thing lives there, then they can continue with whatever it was that they did there. Okay, there's 4 ways that non-conforming use can go away. Destruction is one of them. If I go to my notes, I can give you the other 3.
Oh, sure.
Right off the top of my head. But I mean, the obvious one here is destruction. I mean, the city could come in and take it if they wanted to, and that has been done throughout the United States, even though the Supreme Court says it's legal. I have a problem with that. The city can do that. But if they do that, then that's considered taking, and the
There will
city
be a
has,
lot more people in this
and
room.
the city has to pay, additional.
Just
Over there.
compensation.
Okay, just compensation for what the value of the land would be worth. Now, you've got to, convince me that business property isn't worth as much as residential property, but if that is the case, then the city would have to pay the extra. Okay.
Thank you.
Hey Jim, I'm Julie Kraus, 124 Palm Street. So this is my second meeting, so I need to catch up a little bit, but are you suggesting then, as part of this process, we talk about converting some of this land from residential to commercial?
Well, it's
Is that on the
already
table?
commercial land.
Oh, that we've allowed.
They've got a
homes to go on it?
non-conforming use in that commercial
And remind
zone.
me, commercial is all that in dark?
Commercial is everything that's in red. What's in black are either businesses or residences which are already in that commercial
Okay,
space.
so you think we have enough area designated to commercial, we just allowed too many homes to build there?
Well,
That's
that's
the
my
easiest
opinion,
Okay,
okay? Because right now, there's no place for businesses to go.
yeah.
The opinion
So-
of our consultant, the evaluation, was that our percentage of commercial to residential is significantly less than the average community.
Okay, so that's another problem then. We've allowed homes to come in and build there, but on top of that, we don't have enough land designated commercial. That's what our.
Well, no, we
consultant-
had enough land designated commercial. We no longer do.
Yeah,
Because we've allowed the variances for people to come in and build on that commercial land. Now, there's different ways we can handle this, okay? We can say, hey, no more conforming use if you've got a residence that's been destroyed. If you want to rebuild, it has to be a business. Okay, we can take and change the zoning map and take other property which is not currently designated as general commercial, and if nobody's in it right now and it's not under use, change that zoning to commercial,
That's a better idea.
okay? So that's a possibility. The problem is, with that, you gotta put the commercial areas somewhere where people are gonna wanna go there. Not in the middle of a low-density residential area or something else. And right now, generally, we've got this area here, which doesn't belong to the city, along 386, and we've got all this other area out here west of the canal, which under agreement with St. Joe Company, we've agreed to make tourist mixed use. So, I mean, as far as putting commercial property somewhere else where it doesn't exist, I mean, that's something that we're gonna have to consider and where we can do it, but that's another option for doing it. And then the other thing is just to go with what we've got here, and the problem has been going on for several years. If you talk to a lot of people in Panama City, they will tell you, oh yeah, Mexico Beach, they don't like businesses there. Because Jack, for one, tried to put his business in here and couldn't find a place to do it. So that's the general consensus with a lot of people who wanna come in here, we're not friendly to businesses.
Let me ask something. Chuck Kraus, 124 Palm Street. So if that was, hypothetically, if those people were 51% or whatever, and they had to build commercial there, you could do commercial and have residential on the second floor,
Yes.
right? So like, you could have a store or whatever, as long as it didn't go over a certain height. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Then you have to ask yourself, how many people that are currently living in their house want to start a business just so they can continue to live there?
No, but I mean,
Oh,
the
gosh.
homes-
Yeah, I'd dare say that you
Yeah.
probably won't find anybody.
Have you done a check yet to see how many homes are over the 50% that could be converted back to commercial?
No, I haven't. All I did was
Okay,
go
do
out
you
on
know
a
what
golf
that
cart
would
the other
be?
day and
Okay.
make note of which ones
Okay,
were
Are
residents.
you basically going
Most
up
of them.
15th Street when you're talking, I'm not looking at the map, so are you talking
I'm
about?
talking 15th and 98. And then, for one thing, I don't know, I mean, I wasn't aware until I was told by longtime residents that this whole area right here, which is generally low-density residential, at one time, all of this area along 15th was general commercial. And it was rezoned residential. So that's a whole lot of area that they've gone in and rezoned to allow more housing to come in. So that's the problem. And how do we address it? Do we address it and not allow non-conforming use in the zones? Or do we address it further down the road? Or do we just allow people to go in and build and have the sunset clause in there as it's written? I'd like to get an opinion from people in the community before we make a decision on that.
So, I'm Wiley, I'm the general manager of the El Governor. So the people that own the property now that is designated commercial territory that we're allowed to build there, we don't know how many of them plan to rebuild. So if some of them chose not to rebuild, would it be within the city's limits to say if you sold that property, the new owner would have to put in a business
I'm
downstairs?
sorry, I overlooked one other solution, okay? Current landowners that plan to rebuild, we can allow them the non-conforming use with the sunset provision. If you sell your land, it has to be general commercial. And I wish Nick were here to tell me whether or not that's legal, but that's another possible solution.
That's what Shelley's here for, she can answer. Linda, I'm sorry.
If that would just change the sunset opportunity, right now, as it's written, we give the owner of the property that has been using it with the city's permission, legally, as a residential, it doesn't fit in that category anymore. If it was substantially damaged, we give them 3 years to build it back residential to the density, it's not just single family, to the density that they had on October 10th. If you are saying that that is only good for the people who owned it, not if they sold it to somebody else, I would have a concern on whether that is a restraint on alienation, but you could try it. I have another concern about that also. Let's just say you have a bunch of residential, and this person right here wants to be commercial. Will they be able to, the parking issues, there's a lot of requirements if you're running a business that don't necessarily have the same impact as a residential unit would have. And so I would have a concern without knowing what the parcels are, whether or not they can meet the requirements for commercial.
Most of them are too small. Most of your
Right.
commercial parcels are too small.
Exactly.
Right, they're right now a small, single-family lot. I don't know what kind of commercial you could get on that.
Couldn't you fit the same type of commercial that occupies them already if each pizza's on a lot?
Yeah.
Is it any
But
different?
there's
It's
no
just a matter of
stormwater.
parking.
I mean, to meet the new requirements, if it was substantially damaged, you'd have to do stormwater, you'd have to pay parking. You know, all that stuff was built prior to existing code.
Well, then it seems like there's only one option then.
To expand another area.
Well, and I was gonna ask too, when y'all were updating the comp plan, did you look at anything on your land use map, like where potentially might be a new commercial area?
No, we did not. We talked about rezoning,
Uh-huh,
but we didn't go into specifics on the
on
rezoning.
the areas,
Because there are areas that are currently zoned on here which are used for other things,
yes.
which haven't been designated. If we're gonna go ahead and, grandfather those people, whoever does the new zoning map, I'd recommend that they just go ahead and change that to low-density residential that's right there, rather than keep it general commercial. Then we're not gonna run into this problem again. But if we decide to go with the way it's written, we still sometime in the future have to come up with other areas
Yes,
that we can designate,
and that's the purpose of the future land use map, is to create those areas.
yes.
The zoning doesn't have to reflect it today, should, but it didn't have to, but the land use would have to.
Yes,
be
ma'am.
there.
Debbie Allen, 106 20th Street. One of my best friends owns one of those lots at the end of 15th Street, where her house was. They barely had parking for 2 cars. There's no business that's gonna be able to go in those places right there, none whatsoever.
And they continuously have,
Have a problem.
but yeah, they're 106 20th Street. They continuously have problems with
The rental
the,
house.
the rental house beside them, but their garbage pickup, they would tell them they had to put it at the front of the house or at the back of the house, and they said, well, they can't put it at the back of the house because it's on the beach. I know that was one of their
Big problems.
big fusses about was, we gotta put our garbage can in the front because if we don't, we put it on the beach.
Okay.
Lisa Logan, 402 Maryland. When you're talking about, as an option, changing some of the existing land, I'm guessing in residential, to potential commercial property, where exactly are you talking about? Because Bonfire Beach, which is the brown up there, is a St. Joe community, and that's tourist mixed use, that's their thing. The white 88 acres down here is St. Joe property, it's not incorporated in the city, so that's St. Joe. You've got La Siesta, which was supposed to have been, it's still zoned commercial, was supposed to have been all commercial, it's now all houses. So where exactly are we going to have anything to change? Because we've got the new 88 acres that Corey just sold, right up there, the triangle. That's gonna be a development. So that leaves you with just what we've got in residential general, residential single family, and then you've got your tourist commercial, tourist residential. So where exactly are we talking about getting the land? And by the way, what Alara told us was, in the meetings that we attended, the standard formula is 15% commercial to 85%, is it 85? 15 and 85? To 85% residential. Mexico Beach has 5% commercial to 95% residential. So, no, we have no place to put businesses because in the last 20 years, they've allowed all these residences to go into all of the existing commercial and with no overall plan. So where are we gonna take the land? What land are we thinking of changing? There's nothing left.
Well, I don't see why we can't rezone, land out there west of the canal.
Yeah, that's what I was.
That, west of the canal, are you talking about St. Joe's land?
That's,
It's in the city.
that's an approved PUD.
That's an approved PUD.
It's an approved
already.
PUD.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's an,
Well, then we can't go
you
there.
can't change that.
When was that approved?
Why not?
2006, I covered it for the Star.
Why can't it be changed?
Because it's already been approved as, well, wait a minute, if they had their plans in?
No.
Well, don't they have to have their plans in, what is it?
They'll be here tomorrow night, tomorrow afternoon at the council meeting. They have a proposal tomorrow.
But it still has to be within 18 months, isn't it? Or 6 months maybe,
No,
Before the
after
change.
it's been approved.
that was-
Yeah.
That's part of that whole mess.
But, I mean,
Now
one of the
is
things that the
previous,
city
but-
could do, if they chose that area to have more commercial, you could ask St. Joe to provide more commercial, but that's a perfect area.
And I think we'll see that. I think the goal for tonight, I mean, we can talk about commercial and where we wanna find commercial land later, but the goal for between now and February 9th is to answer all of these questions so people know what to do as soon as that moratorium expires. We're not gonna solve commercial property.
No.
But then if you
Yeah.
decide to go ahead and make these decisions tonight without solving the question of commercial, what have you solved?
Well, the lots here, that Jim has marked, those aren't big enough, as Ray said, those aren't big enough to put commercial with parking and all of the requirements for stormwater management. That's why residential homes are sitting on them today, because they're not gonna work for commercial. So we're not gonna solve commercial property right there. We may solve it with St. Joe's PUD. We may solve it with the PUD on the opposite side, so, I mean, both of those, boat ramp and this side of the canal are both PUDs, which will have some commercial in there, but.
And that's one thing Laura said in the past too, is that, who was our advisor on the comp plan, is that most of these properties are not attractive because they're too small. There's not a whole lot you can do with those properties. So, I've heard questions come out of the residents, but I haven't heard any opinions as to what they think we should do.
You know, one of the things I love about going to Port St. Joe is you have a town. You know, you can park the car, go out to eat, shop, you can actually have a place to go. So I think we should think about that long-term for our city, right? Rather than scattered out everywhere, there's a business here or there. You know, to start to create that culture and that, you know, the thing that we love about this place. So I think that's an opportunity, and I'm sure, you know, this council's thinking about that, but.
I kinda like it the way it is, scattered around.
Do ya?
Yeah, I do. That's why I'm here. I like the little tiny town feel.
I think the Bonfire Beach area, I mean, I like Windmark, which is never taken off, but I think it'd be the perfect opportunity for Mexico Beach to grow in that area and have business and residential.
The only problem with, zoning something out there as business is there's no business wanna go out there until somebody lives there. I can't imagine wanting to put a restaurant or hardware store or something out there unless there's actually somebody out there.
Somebody told me Killer's moving out there.
Well, they're going to
Windmark.
Oh, they're going to
that way.
Windmark.
Yes.
Well, they may not be going to Windmark.
But that is why St. Joe's coming to meet with the council,
Businesses.
to talk about future development.
Yeah.
Cause we definitely need to
It'd be
Okay.
great, it'd be a great area.
So, any other comments from the audience? I'll throw it open to the board.
I just.
Hey, Jim, this is Bill.
Yeah, Bill?
I just want, it's a little hard to hear on the phone, but in the, St. Joe development, of course, there is 55,000 acres that, is commercial already set up in there. 55,000 square feet, I'm sorry. So that's helpful. That may not solve it, but that's helpful, and perhaps we can get them to increase that.
Where is
I
that,
just
Bill?
want to throw that out. That's the Bonfire Beach area that people talk about.
Well, then
It's
why,
no
why does
different.
it not indicate that on,
There's a PUD.
It's a PUD.
It's,
Takes over the zoning code. It does, it's specifically stated in what's in front of you. If you look at 1.15 C, I'll just read it for the people that don't have it in front of them. Maximum 55,000 square feet of heated and cooled commercial space to include auxiliary uses and structures. So, and then 15,000 square feet of heated office and pool. So it's also maximum of 750 dwelling units. So there is some space already set up there for
where,
that.
what are you reading from again, Bill?
1-11.
1-11, yep, page 1-11, policy 1.1.5 C.
Okay. Okay, so then that's something that could be worked out.
Yes.
Most people
Tomorrow.
would be, most
Yeah.
developers would be
And that's-
happy with
Right.
this, like commercial.
Okay.
St.
The
Joe.
other thing I was gonna
Right.
say,
Yeah.
the other thing I was gonna say, if you think about the boat ramp at Port St. Joe, there is quite a bit of commercial, trying to happen around there. We've got, the St. Joe boat ramp, so there's potentially room there for commercial also. Fresh start, lay it out the way they want it, that's also a possibility.
Thank you, Bill. Okay, what I'm looking for from the board is a comment on the comp plan as it's written. Again, I'm referring to
1-6.
page 1-6, paragraph F2, line 6 down. Is that a good plan? Should we go with that, or should we do something else?
Jim, I heard some people click in, you might wanna just read, some of that verbiage, because they don't have it in front of them or screen to look at.
Okay. For those of you that are on the phone, first four, okay, this is applying the 50% rule, non-conforming use to a land use zone. First floor residential uses that existed in the general commercial category on October 10th, 2018 are exempted from this requirement and shall be allowed to continue or be rebuilt to the density that was existing on October 10th, but shall otherwise be required to meet all regulations and construction codes in effect. This exemption shall expire December 31st, 2021. So you basically have 3 years to comply. For those first floor residential properties without an active building permit, lodging such as hotels, motels, bed and breakfast establishments shall not be considered residential use. So if you've got a condominium, a motel, or something like that, then you're not part of this thing that we're talking about here. You can continue in perpetuity. So does anybody out there on the phone have a comment? No, board, throw it up to you again.
I don't see any other way to do it.
Okay, I don't see any other way to do it either and meet the revenue problems the city currently has. So I would approve this if it were left up to me. The problem being is that right now, the city has no way to address where we need to go business-wise. So we really need to develop some kind of business advisory council or something like that and look at that in the future when we start considering these things where people come in and ask for variances. So can I get a motion from someone on the board to either recommend approval or disapproval, excuse me, to recommend that we accept or reject the future land use element as is currently written? With change.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask a couple of different questions
Sure.
before you have that under discussion? I had a question about, and it's existing language, so it would be something that you would have to consider changing. It's in high-density residential, which is where your condominiums are. The height limitation, which by the way, does not have to be in a comprehensive plan. Your choice has been to put the height limitation in the comprehensive plan. You cannot get a variance from the comprehensive plan, as you can from a land development regulation. So in high-density residential,
Which page are you on?
I'm on 1-3. It says no more than 32 feet in height. I have a place in Summer House right down the way, and I don't know how I don't know the circumstances of when it was built, and I'm not an architect or an engineer, but just standing there next to it, it seems to me to be higher than 32 feet in height, and it seems to be that is the land use category that it would fit under. And so I wonder, it wasn't substantially damaged, but if it were, and there was 32 foot height limitation with 4 stories worth of owners, you would be creating a huge non-conforming situation. And I'm not sure it might have been right. We don't want anything. I think the same is true of Paradise Shores. It may be true of others that I'm not as familiar. Waterside. So I'm just bringing it up to you as an issue, just like we did last week with general commercial. If it's your intent to say to those, it's not substantially damaged this time, I'm not saying, I'm not trying to jinx it, but if something happened to it, we would either have to come off this 32 feet, or if your druthers are that all the new folks that might be able to come in would be limited to 32 feet. That was my
Yeah,
question.
our intent was to keep the height down so that we're not like we're driving through a canyon when you go down 98. So that's the reason we did that. I didn't consider, of course, we're supposed to be hurricane proof here. So nobody has ever considered anything, construction-wise in this area. But that was our intent, and, my feelings are, that's a road we need to deal with when we come to it. Because again, we're trying to keep heights down.
Okay. This will come up when we talk in the land development regulations, because at your request, we worked on some language that we will get your suggestions on this evening, having to do with non-conforming uses. I have a feeling, I don't know your land use map versus your zoning map versus your reality, but just as we found out in general commercial that the reality is there is a lot of residential, which is not allowed in general commercial, there is probably other categories of uses in your comp plan that are not the use that's on the ground, or that was on the ground on early morning of October 10th. And that you may want to have in your future land use element a process, a variance process for the city council to hear, which is essentially a hardship case or an equity case, that let me build back to what I had for your other categories as well as general commercial. I'm just placing that thought with you.
Why would we put that in the comp plan rather than the LDR?
You will not, you cannot vary the land use categories. The city council would have to amend the land use category to allow something to happen if it wasn't, just like we did with general commercial. Just like we just said for general commercial, we're giving you 3 years to get, to decide whether you want to try to go commercial or you're going to stay residential. We don't have that authorization in any of the other land use categories. And you might want to have that leeway in your comprehensive plan to give your city council the ability to make those hardship decisions. Or they'll be doing a lot of, land use map amendments.
We can change the comp plan, used to be twice a year, now it's whenever we need to
That's
do it.
right, whenever you need it.
So my intent on that would be proceed with what we've got so we can go ahead and get this thing done. And then if that's something we need to address later on, then we can amend the comp plan, send it to the state and see what they've got to say.
Okay, I just think you might hear, as we move through this process for the next 6 weeks, I think you might hear from more people who have, an issue that.
Yeah, and if that's the case, once it comes back and we find that to be a problem, then we can do it immediately.
Okay,
But I just would like to get this thing done. We've been working on this.
You can't do it today anyway. The public hearing that's advertised for the approval of the future land use is next Monday.
it's next time.
So you cannot vote today.
This is a workshop on the plan and the land
Yeah,
development.
cannot vote on approving this today.
The meeting's on the 11th,
No, the 17th.
the 17th.
Any other question?
Okay.
Mary Blackburn, on the same page, in the same, high-density residential, so it used to be tourist residential, which is, and now
Yeah,
it's
they
been
just
changed
changed
to
the name of it.
high-density residential, okay. So that's just about everything beachside. That's sort of what I wanted to talk about is, so the density is no more than 8 dwelling units per acre. So that's like 5,400 square feet per household. There aren't any more, but there were tons of townhomes that were beachside that no longer exist, but they were individually owned, so they have 15, feet wide lot now. So I'm assuming that if this is passed as is, those people cannot rebuild those townhomes. Am I interpreting that correctly?
Well, in order for them to rebuild, everybody in that parcel would have to agree that this is what we're gonna do. Is that not correct?
Well, that's sort of what I'm asking, is they're all individually owned townhomes, they were built in the 80s, some, so now they own a piece of property that according to 8
They're
dwellings
non-conforming.
per acre, they can't build on that.
Where are you
I
looking
think
at
this
here?
is,
1-3.
yeah, that didn't change. The name changed, but that was the only thing that was
Yeah,
changed about it.
It's a double
I absolutely agree,
Right.
that does not change, that's been in there.
Yes.
But that was before
Right.
Michael, so all of those people,
There is an exemption for non-conforming structures, and density is one that the council can exempt. It's under, it's what you sent earlier.
I know, and that's the land development
Yeah,
regulation.
that's.
Yeah.
And that's exactly my point. I have a feeling that there are going to be more circumstances than just the general commercial that we had an escape hatch for, that we wrote since last week. And when we review the language that we have from the land development regulations, you may want to consider having a general policy in the comprehensive plan that would allow the city council to, or to go into each category and say, notwithstanding this category, if you had on October 10th this existing use,
okay,
that you can recreate it,
With a time limit.
with a time.
for the time.
Because the way it's written now is absolutely correct. They will not be able to build back the way it is.
No,
If
yeah,
it's
if
more
they
than 8
exceeded
units
more
an
than
acre.
8 units an acre, they could not build it.
They could not build back, and the council would be, if they approved it, it would be,
Unreasonable to vary.
subject to challenge.
If they approve this, they would be
No,
subject.
no, 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 no,
Oh.
if they
They approve
approve
the
something that was in violation of the comprehensive plan,
Yeah, I completely understand that.
yeah.
Tanya, what was it that you said that there is already in there something that you can override that density?
In the land development regulations,
Oh.
under non-conforming structures, it allows the council to overlook density for those non-conforming structures that are damaged in a disaster.
Even if they're gone? I mean, not 49% or 50% gone.
I don't have that
A
right
land
before
development
me.
regulation, though, that can't trump the comp.
Right, exactly.
Okay,
So if
that's
they
why I
change
said,
this,
you may
yeah.
want to consider
Okay.
placing some generic language in the comprehensive plan that would authorize
Yes.
a density
That would be wonderful.
waiver
Right.
in
That'd
the,
be great.
It could just be a policy that applied to all the land use categories, and it'd be just a
Yes.
3-year limit or
That would be,
That's the right thing to do.
yeah, absolutely, it is absolutely.
it's not written, Mr. Chairman, but we can write it. It is similar to what is written in the draft land
Okay,
development
let me
regulations.
ask, let's go back to Adrian again. Okay, so when is our transmittal meeting for the comp plan with the council? No.
With the council's in January, but your meeting to approve it, to send it to the council, is Monday, 1 week from today.
Okay, so that could be written and
Yes.
ready for us to go over, just like we did
Yes.
this change. Okay, unless there's an objection from the council, let's do that, Linda.
Yes, sir.
And,
And we have something that's similar to it to distribute to you tonight that would go in the land development regulations.
okay,
Okay, so then we'll just write it in a more generic way for the comprehensive plan.
okay,
And this is use, not,
just flip.
this is use.
So we're not done with future land use, so we don't need a motion for us to approve what we've got here, because we're gonna change it again.
I have one other issue that I
Sure.
wanted to bring up, and that is in,
Hey, Jim,
Yeah, Bill?
along those lines, what Mary said, I think I've been getting hammered, by people asking if, they can rebuild, or they wanna rebuild, if their homes don't meet the current setback, regulations, where the homes were built in the 70s or 80s. I think our setbacks were 15 feet, some places maybe we didn't even have setbacks. So now, with the 20-foot setback, their house would encroach on that, in rebuilding it the exact same as it was before. On some of those lots, there wouldn't be room to rebuild. So that's a question that's come up to me, and I don't have a good answer for that. And I saw that on our list of things we need to cover, but I don't know whether it should be covered in what we're talking about now or in the LDR.
it should be covered in the LDR. Setbacks are not in the comprehensive plan, and we will have time to discuss them, in the land development regulations.
Thank
So
you.
the answer is that it hasn't been decided yet.
Right. By you. The other issue, Mr. Chairman, was, in page 1-1, policy 1.1.2, we did break it up as we discussed last week, but in paragraph B, maximum height shall be measured from the base flood elevation, there's no period there. What we were talking about is whether it would be +1, as it is currently in the land development regulations, or perhaps when you see the new maps, it would be +2. So that's a blank, that will be filled in by you. You follow up my question, is it's not.
I know
gonna be-
Gulf County right now, it's 2 feet.
Yeah, and 2 feet has been generally considered to be the prudent, thing to do because of the maps, moving, going up. So I just wanted to point that out, that there's no period there, it would probably be filled in by +2.
We don't
2 feet.
really know that. Gulf County is using maps from 2007. We're gonna use 2017 best available for Mexico Beach. In Gulf County, their 2 feet is just temporary, so
It's not up for 16 now.
Do we have any idea what that FEMA flood insurance map is gonna look like?
it's gonna change.
Well, it's
I'll tell you
definitely gonna
that.
change.
That's all I can tell
The
you.
the old one didn't work
We're
very
gonna
well.
have it by the 21st, so my point is, we don't know what we're gonna do, so we can't lock into
Right.
that.
Before it's finally adopted, we will know,
Okay,
And we can plug it in
and we can plug it in.
for that.
yeah, that's
by-
fine,
Let's bring
that's
that up.
fine.
Okay.
We'll know the 21st.
It
We'll
could be
have
no,
the maps
it
by
could
the
be no
21st.
more plus, I mean, I'm not suggesting an answer, I'm just saying that could change.
But, I mean, the 1 foot versus 2, I still don't, I mean, on a category 5 storm or 4 like we just had, what does it really matter?
I don't know, +3 makes a difference, I can tell you, people who went up
I
higher
mean,
than.
would it have, if we would've been +2, would it have made a big difference?
I guess it really depends on where you were at and what your existing elevation was. FEMA will, I mean, they're gonna change the map, of course,
Right.
based on what the data they picked up since the storm.
Right.
In which in Gulf County, I don't know when they're gonna do it, they actually they're doing it right now.
Right.
But if they get the data here by the 21st, I mean, that'll be a big step to be able to determine what that is. And then
So-
you can see too, because we'll be able to show.
So really, we just need to wait on FEMA. Plug that in, plug that in.
And that's basically what she said, we're just gonna leave that vacant right now and
Yes.
fill it in once
I just
more.
wanted
Determine that
to
elevation.
alert them.
Is
Any
the,
other?
is the 21st a hard date?
21st is their commitment to get us the best available maps. That'll be the first time the city gets to see them, so we'll have to review them with our consultants and take a look at them and make sure, it has all the information we need.
Tony, can we use that map? I mean, if it's not the official FEMA,
Yes.
I mean, we can use that, but
Yes.
do planning.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, any other issues based for the comp plan? Okay, before we go into the LDR, I've got some issues we wanna address, and you've got some, Linda, so let's start with what you've got for us.
Yes, sir.
And then if you don't cover what I wanna cover, then we'll go ahead and do that and get input from, the public. One thing I wanna point out, when we first started developing this comp plan, nobody had ever sat down and said what they want Mexico Beach to look like. You know, so the first meeting we had on the comp plan about 18 months ago, we brought members of the community in, broke down into work groups and said, okay, what do you want your city to look like? And this is basically what we came up with what we want the city to look like, basically retain the small town values, the small town appearance, our current architecture and everything else. And these are the values that below where I've got goals, the values that we wanted to do. Now, some of those conflict with each other. And when it comes to a certain issue, you might have to look at the conflicting values and determine which is better for the general welfare. But these are the things we're trying to promote. So in writing the comp plan, everything we wrote in the comp plan took this into consideration. Everything in the LDR, because it's based on the comp plan, should also take these into consideration. So if you've got comments, you know, make sure that this is what you're looking at, because this is what we decided we want our city to look like. Linda.
I'm not sure everybody knows Ray Greer, who is going to be the lead planner working on the revisions to the land development regulations, and his colleague Erin Schaefer, she was here last week. And they, the ones that has created the list of issues. One of the issues that was on the list was way down on the list, but it was highlighted by this board as something you wanted to talk about a lot, and that was non-conforming uses. And we looked at the current policy in the land development regulations, and we took a stab at amendments to that. And you can take a second and scan it, and sorry, I thought it would have been distributed earlier, and we won't make that mistake again. But I will, the paragraph 4, B4, is the where there's some judgment calls in here, and your guidance is needed. Right now, it's to be as close to the other language as possible, but trying to expand a little bit. This has a legally existing residential dwelling unit existing as the date of the original adoption of the code in 1991. You might want to say existing on October 10th, 2018, instead of only having this apply to the older structures that were pre-91, pre the code. But there would be a reason for them to be non-conforming if it was before the code and before the plan, because many local governments in Florida never had a plan before they were required to under the 1985 Act. So, shall be deemed consistent, and if destroyed by fire, may be rebuilt within 3 years of the date of destruction to the density as existing prior to the destruction. And that's essentially what we talked about before. If we wanted to have a generic policy for the comprehensive plan, it would be, if you had it on October 10th and it was substantially damaged, you can rebuild to your existing density. This is residential only.
And existing code.
Any kind of residential, high density residential?
It just says residential.
Okay,
Now remember, lodging is different. Lodging,
yes.
condominiums are not lodging, they are residential. Apartments are residential. Hotels, motels, beds and breakfasts are lodging. so this would not apply to that.
What was the density under the 1991?
It was, this just says if you were there in 1991, whatever you had, you can have it back.
Yeah, but with the exception, when you build it back, you have to build it to
The
current
codes.
code.
Correct.
Okay, again, we're going to get back into that setback thing, and
That's
because
right.
all around town, these old houses,
Yeah.
some of them are sitting on the line. Some
Yes,
of them
That's correct.
you are gonna
Yeah.
get on it, and you'll have to make the decision on how much leeway you wanna give to either yourself or the council on variances from setbacks. But, one way to, handle setbacks is to go up instead of out. So, there, it's not necessarily, I might not have exactly, it might not look what it looked like before, but I'll have the same density.
I guess maybe I didn't state my question good enough, did the city allow more density back in the day than they do now, or?
Well, that's when the comp plan and the land development code was adopted, was in 91.
I'm not sure they had
Yeah,
They didn't-
prior to that, it was just a
Yeah.
plat. Mexico Beach was platted.
platted, there are many references in the ordinances to units of platted lots as opposed to any comprehensive plan.
The state wasn't regulating the comp plans.
So do we know when the density started?
1991.
In 91 was this first.
So that was my question, what was the density in 91?
Same
Is
as
it
it is today.
Same as it is today, then that's not an issue.
Well, somebody might have built in 2000 and was allowed to build. So the alternative to saying if it was there in 91 was if it was there.
I'd
That's
say,
October
I'd say
10th.
that's where you need to put October 10th in.
Well, then that's the option.
I think that makes it a lot clearer.
Okay. Easy enough.
Anybody else on the board?
I agree.
Anything else,
Jim,
Ray?
you saying that you go back to 91 or October 10th?
October 10th.
Coming forward to October 10th.
10-10.
Agreed, okay, yes.
This is now density as opposed to regulatory requirements, setbacks. That's not what this is not giving you that. This gives you, it shall meet all the codes now in effect.
Anything else, Ray?
Now, one of the things that we wanted to talk about was really to hear from you. And, some of your issues that you have with your land development code. Of course, we're going through, we're making the changes. We'll have some more stuff to present to you, give to you next week. But, one of the things we wanted to hear was kind of what some of the things that have been coming up to your board. I know you said you've been on this board for 15 years.
No, I've been on the
Two.
board for 2 years. They
Oh,
haven't
I
had
said
a board for
15
that
years.
long.
He's lived here for 10.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. There's a lot of things in the land development regulations that are, for example, there is no more Department of Community Affairs. And so there'll be a lot of cleanup that looks like a lot of changes that won't change the substance of it. There are a lot of, there's references to the standard building code. There is no standard building code. There's housekeeping. And
Yeah.
so those things, you might as well, and also the city, and this is not unusual for smaller cities, they adopt ordinances, they don't always then incorporate them immediately into the land development regulations. So I've been working with Nick where he has provided me with ordinances that have been adopted in the last several years that will have an impact on the land development regulations, and we will have the ordinance language in the land development regulations so that you don't have different language in the LDRs versus the ordinances.
Okay. What I'd like to do then is start with other members of the board. Any issue that you think we need to address, it should go in the LDR. We'll let you present the issue, open it up to the audience for comments, then we'll discuss it as a board, provide them an opportunity for rebuttal, and then we'll decide what we should recommend to Ray and Aaron on the LDR. Does that sound all right? Jack, you have anything?
The issue that I've heard the most, just to share my part of the background, is from businesses trying to exist here. And we've dealt with the issue of food trucks, because they couldn't open restaurants and didn't have the land to do it. Ice cream stands, that's just the one that rises to the top, in hunting experience here. Businesses trying to find a way to exist here.
So what are you suggesting then?
I don't know that I have a solution. He's asking, what have you heard? And that's what I've heard.
Or but you don't have anything specific that needs to be addressed, just that we need to work on getting businesses in. That goes again back to a development council.
Yeah.
David?
Well, the problems that I've got with the comp plan is what I've had all along is the heights.
We're not talking comp plan here. We're talking issues that have come up in our meetings that need to be addressed in the LDR.
No.
Laura?
The only ones that I've really heard a lot about, and this is, you know, being out and about in the public, are, I've been here since 1996, that people are very, are questioning is what this town will look like and if it will even be a town. So, just taking off of that, I guess that people are really wondering if big business is going to come in and buy up this and buy up that, and the height, you know, changing of the heights because they really wanna keep it on a lower, we don't wanna look like, A1A in Fort Lauderdale, or for that matter, Destin or Panama City Beach or any place in between. That's what I hear the most. My answer to them is what we are working on it, and I just suggest that we continue on that road, to make this as comparative to what it was as we can, and to take that and make it one step better, for everyone who lives here, who will live here, and make it a little tighter, a little more knitted, like with your setbacks or with your whatevers. So that, you know, everybody is satisfied, yet we look good.
You know,
All you really have to do is refer them to the comp plan as we've rewritten it, because that basically says, we're gonna stay the way we were.
That's pretty basically what I've told them. I've tried to let them know that, being you know, a member of this board and a member of the city, that is our wishes as well.
Okay, anything else? Okay, so these are some issues that I've highlighted on notes and stuff where the council has asked us to look at, or we've had people in complaining about something and wanting to know where we stand and to change something. To the best of my knowledge, this is all I can remember. It's definitely, I'm sure, not a complete definitive list. Okay. Accessory dwellings and accessory apartments on property. Okay, right now, are we going to allow an accessory dwelling, which is a unit, a fully livable unit, apart from the principal building, to exist on that property? Because right now, the LDR doesn't allow that. And if we're going to allow that, are we gonna allow that to be rented? If we're gonna allow it to be rented, are we gonna allow it to be rented long-term, which is more than 6 months, or short-term, which is 3 times a year for less than 3 weeks, or for 3 weeks or less at a time? Okay. The LDR currently allows an accessory apartment, which is part of the principal structure, which contains everything in that principal structure that is required to live in. So, you know, you could have somebody come in and live in that accessory apartment, but it doesn't address renting the accessory apartment. So do we need to address that too? But these are the things that I really need to find out. How do you feel about somebody living in a low-density residential area building an accessory building on their property that would allow somebody to live in it other than them?
I think you have defined dwelling unit on your list of things that we need to do.
We have an idea
And
about that.
it's all land use, not just
We're
like.
gonna define a dwelling first.
Well, it is, accessory's not defined, but a dwelling unit is.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
One housekeeping unit, which would not be, would not include the accessory.
Mhm.
Dwelling unit's a separate, completely livable, that you can sleep, eat, and do all that other stuff in, is a dwelling unit. So are we gonna allow more than one dwelling unit on a piece of property?
that we've looked at with that as well is on our land development regulations allow accessory apartments to be built on the lower floor of a unit, and some of those are in floodplains, and it can't be put there, but the LDR allows it to be, but it can't be put on that, lower structure. So there are several issues, and I know you guys are looking at that,
Yeah.
and maybe you guys could come back and make a recommendation, at least of different options and language to consider, cause that's a big one to,
Yeah, but see, I'd like to hear from what the community has
Yeah.
to say. How do you feel about somebody building an apartment next to you and then renting it out? Or allowing their mother-in-law or somebody to live in it? How do you feel about that?
Detached?
Detached.
We've had that problem beside us in the past, when they used to rent out the building beside us, and it can be a big problem if they rent it to somebody, and then they sublet it to somebody, which is what happened to us, and we had 17 people in a one-bedroom little accessory apartment.
You're talking about low-density residential.
I'm talking about low-density
I
residential.
think it
that's
should
where
be
we
one
are.
dwelling per property, right? If it's low
And
density.
see, here you've got the conflicting issues again, where you've got the landowner not allowing him to use his land the way he wants to, with the expectations of the neighborhood, because the neighborhood doesn't expect to have every Tom, Dick, and Harry, when they think they're living in a nice, quiet neighborhood, having an accessory structure there that they're renting out. So which takes precedence, the expectations of the neighborhood, or the ability of the owner to make use of his property the way he wants to make use of it, as long as it's in accordance with the LDR and the comp plan? That's what I'm asking.
Well, if you remember, we have been over this multiple times this year, and, I think the city was probably equally divided. My personal opinion is, I have seen too many in the last 17 years who have built what are essentially illegal accessory structures that started out as a shed, then it was turned into a garage, then it became an apartment, and we have had no control whatsoever over any of these structures. That still remains a problem. If we decide to do it, how are we gonna control it? My personal opinion is, I don't think it should be allowed because it gets out of hand, and you have, with the expectation of one house per lot, that creates two houses per lot. It may be a little house, but it's another dwelling, with traffic, with cars, with noise. So the expectation of a single family neighborhood is you have a single family dwelling. So I am not for it. I have ample room. I could probably put 3 or 4 of them on my lot, because I've got a big lot. But that's not what I moved into. I moved into a neighborhood of single-family homes, expecting single-family homes. And other places I've lived, they weren't allowed. So I don't see why they're allowed here.
Yes, ma'am.
Pool houses that become bunk houses, we have that too.
Anyone else?
Yeah, Jim, we have that at the end of our street, right, and it looks like people are living in a garage, and it could be beautiful if you have a carriage house or something, but that's not typically what you see.
No.
So I would echo what you say, I agree. One family.
I'm for the one family, one
Yeah.
house.
Anyone on the telephone have a comment? Okay, let me throw it open for board discussion.
I would live in low density residential if I didn't want it to be so.
If, I'm calling in, and the question that I have is in
Name and
regard
address,
to
please.
that, I'm sorry,
Name and address, please.
110 Circle Drive.
Name.
So.
Sir, what's your name?
What is the?
Sir, what is your name?
Osborne.
Okay, go ahead.
Randy Osborne.
Go ahead,
The
sir.
question is, what is the definition of a dwelling unit? Is it Is it bedrooms? Is it defined by, kitchens? Or how do you define a dwelling unit? The reason I asked the question, I'm one of the older homes that,
You want me to tell?
If you got it, Linda, I've got it, I just don't know where it is.
It says, a single housing unit providing complete independent living facilities for one housekeeping unit, including permanent provisions for living, sleeping, eating, cooking, and sanitation. One housekeeping unit is a dwelling unit.
so that means one kitchen?
Has to have all of them.
It has to be completely livable.
Bathroom, kitchen.
Okay, is a dwelling unit equal to 2 kitchens or?
No, it has to have sleeping area, it has to have a bathroom area. If, just the kitchen is not a dwelling unit.
Okay. So the residence that I have, when I purchased it, had 2 areas, I'll call it of habitation. But it had 2 kitchens and it had bathroom, sleeping, living facilities.
Was it a separate
Which is a
structure?
non-conforming unit. And all in one building, one unit.
That's not,
That's accessory apartment, that's fine under the LDR.
that's not an accessory.
Okay, good.
Anyone else? Okay, so most of the comments I've heard believe we shouldn't allow a dwelling unit on residential property.
Can I just ask a question? Is that attached or detached? I know you said, I heard you guys say.
Detached.
But if it's attached, you're okay with that? If it's a dwelling unit on the first floor or over the garage? I mean, from
Well, I
what I
think
heard
we've-
you guys say.
I think we've
it's-
covered that with the accessory apartment, have we not?
They're attached, they're not accessory then. Same
It's,
structure.
it's called an accessory, apartment in the LDR, but it's a separate, that is truly a separate dwelling unit.
But it's attached to the,
It's attached, but it's an apartment, so you've taken single family residential and it's now 2 units. So you have the same issue that you guys just said you didn't like.
And there's a ton of
those
in town.
well, yeah, I suppose you could. I mean, I wouldn't, that's.
So in other words, you're talking about a mother-in-law suite.
Yeah, that was more my,
Yeah.
that was more my thought.
But who
process.
controls what they use that mother-in-law
It-
suite
it-
Well,
for?
You
There
can,
is
you can
none.
control that by not allowing it to be rented.
Right,
Can you prohibit rentals
yes.
in a zoning category?
Can't prohibit short-term rentals.
We're not an HOA, we're a city.
And I'd say no. I'd say straight no then if that's the question.
So, look, if I can just make a quick suggestion, maybe, one of the, issues I've seen kind of come up lately with, some of the new builds beachside is they're massive homes, 5, 6 bedrooms. And they're still zoned for 2 parking spots. So what that's done is it just makes all of those people, because obviously, if you've got 5 bedrooms, you're gonna have more than 2 cars. So maybe you could somehow, address that issue. I am perfectly okay with somebody having an attached apartment. We have very little affordable housing here, and I think that, it sometimes can answer that need of affordable living. But maybe we could put the parking regulation, not just single-family home, but how many bedrooms you have, how many bathrooms you have, and I don't know if that's legal or not, but I'm just thinking that maybe we can tie the parking issue with the massiveness of the home.
Something you can look at?
Yeah.
Like that,
Okay. But generally, the consensus I have is we don't allow a separate dwelling unit, just one dwelling unit. If it's attached, nobody generally has a problem with that,
Even though it could be rented.
even though it can be rented.
Do we have a lot of that in Mexico Beach right now?
So you have quite a few.
I built
It's-
one
oh,
3
it's-
months ago.
Yeah.
from a
I mean, I
model.
think that people in this room may not, but I think there's a lot of it in Mexico Beach.
Yeah, and I think they're grandfathered in, but no longer, you know.
Do we have a lot of?
Mine is under one roof, it's
Of
integrated.
accessory structures.
Oh.
Well, they're all over town now, but literally all over town.
Right.
Yeah.
And in the future, there won't be any more separate dwelling units, just the one dwelling unit. Whether or not they've got something attached to it is okay, but no separate dwelling unit on the property.
So anyone that has one before this goes in effect is okay?
Yes,
If it's destroyed, is it okay, Bill?
no, then the 50% rule applies. Okay, height restrictions based on the FEMA flood map. And the issue here is, the way the plan is written now, everything forward of the CCL is based on what the Florida Department of Environmental Protection says you've got to be up above the ground. Okay, so if it's 9 feet, your height restriction starts at 9 feet plus 1, the way we've got it written now. So your first floor has to be at least 10 feet. The issue being, are we going to allow people not forward of the CCL in flood zone X, where there's no danger of being flooded, to be 10 feet in the air?
Are we gonna allow it?
Are we going to allow it,
Where there's no danger of being flooded.
where there's no danger of being flooded?
I don't think you're gonna have any extra.
Because right now, I mean,
I
I'm
don't think we are.
10 feet in the air, and I'm in the highest place in Mexico Beach. You know, and I got all kinds of houses around me that are 10 feet in the air. But the bottom line is, if we're trying to keep the profile of the city down, are we gonna allow people everywhere in the city, whether they're on top of a mountain or something, to go 10 feet in the air, to go 4 feet in the air, or whatever? As long as they're under that 10-foot level, yeah.
Right, that's your only control on it right now. You're maxing the total height at 32 feet. You don't care where they start their building.
Well, I guess that's what I'm asking. They can start their building no greater than 10 feet if we allow everybody in the city to build to the Florida Department of Environmental Protection determination for people in flood zone A or E or whatever, AE or AZ, I guess. V is the other. V is the other one. So for those, they have to build at 10 feet, but are we gonna allow other people to build at 10 feet or at 5 feet if they're not in that flood zone? So that's the question I'm
You
asking.
don't have any existing limitation that I'm aware of.
We don't, not currently. Do we need to have existing limitations? Or are we gonna allow people to build as long as they don't exceed the Florida Department of Environmental Protection's limit? As long as they don't exceed that, are we gonna allow homeowners to build out their first floor wherever they want it to be?
So we end up with what we have, is it Colorado and New Mexico with the
Right.
spaceship? It's
Well, no,
all-
because he's higher than he should be. He's more than 10 feet. His first floor is something
He's
like
got
14 feet. And how that got built, I have no idea.
But there's no, unless you're seaward of the CCL line, it doesn't matter, as long as the top of your roof is 32.
32 feet.
It doesn't matter how high your garage is.
Well, yeah, because you can't go up more than 10 feet, that's what we're saying. Your measurement starts from where the Florida Department of Environmental Protection.
But that's only
line
for
runs.
people seaward of the CCL.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, are we gonna allow people in the city, or elsewhere in the city, to use that same requirement?
The CCCL varies, it's not 10 feet, it's some places 17 and a half, it's not always 10 feet. But the bottom line is, their 32 feet starts at wherever their foundation is, whether that's elevated 17 and a half feet or it's elevated 4 feet, that's where their 32.
Starts with where their first floor is, from where their
Starts
first floor is.
actually from the bottom.
Right.
Bottom of the first floor.
Yeah, their
Yeah.
substructure or whatever.
And
So if
And
you're
you're
17 feet up, that is foot
Seaward.
zero.
Yeah,
you
and
have
for
32
people
feet.
land, the
Anywhere
question is, are
else,
we going to
it's
allow?
32 feet.
Well,
The height
32,
is
that's what I'm asking, are we gonna allow them to have the 10 feet or whatever it is too?
No,
Well, wait a
Yeah,
minute,
definitely.
no, you're gonna count it as part of your 32.
Yes,
Right.
exactly.
That's
So
not
you
the
have
question.
22
It's buildable
feet of
height.
I mean, a lot of people
Buildable
might wanna
space.
park their cars under their house.
Or the
No,
boat,
why would you
like
tell them
I
they
said.
can't?
Or-
He's saying, are you gonna allow them to go up the extra
No.
10 feet?
No.
That's what I'm asking, that's what I'm asking, so they're gonna end up being 42 feet.
No, no. If you're outside the coastal control, seaward of the control line, and outside AE or VE, it's from the curve of the road.
But then what I'm asking is, do we want to give them the option of building up if they want to?
I
That's what
think,
the question I'm asking.
I
And all I'm
think this,
saying is they count the 32 feet from the
Yes,
curve of the road.
32.
Well, not if we put it in the LDR that it's from whatever the Florida Department of
if
Environmental
we're
Protection
requiring
says.
you to build 17 feet up, then you start at 0. But if we're not requiring you and you're prohibiting yourself, I think it's your problem for prohibiting yourself.
Yeah,
If you wanna go 10 feet up, you got 22 to go.
right,
Yeah, that's the question I'm asking.
yeah.
Okay.
I mean, my answer would be no, but that's what I'm asking.
Keep it at-
Isn't there a way to make that simple by just saying it's 32 feet above whatever the base flood elevation is for that zoning category? If you've gotta be up 5 feet from base flood then you've got that 5 feet plus your 32.
And it's gonna have to be like that
Right.
if they put most of Mexico Beach on flood.
Right, right,
And
and I think
expect
that's the
most of
way
it
it's
will
gonna
be-
have to be.
It's gonna have to
You
be.
I don't
can't, you
think we're
can't
gonna have any
penalize
X flood
someone,
zone
you can't use the Crown of the Road in a flood zone.
Right.
No, because you gotta be
This
above
is
it.
Oh, it has to be based on what they say it is.
That's right.
Yes.
So if they say it's 5 feet here, then it would be, the 32 feet starts at your bottom floor, which is 5 feet off the ground.
If they said it was 50 feet, your building would be allowed to be 82 feet.
Yes,
You're saying that's in any, if you're in a flood zone, not seaward of the CCCL line, but
That's
in
right.
any flood zone, if you're in an A flood, well, A, I gotta address that too. So let's say AE, but you're not seaward of the CCCL line, then, and you have to build 5 feet up, then you can actually build 37 feet high?
yes,
Yes.
yes.
Oh, wow.
Is that in this, that's not in this
No,
current?
that's what we're
No.
talking about.
This is
Right
in this
now,
draft.
it's the crown of the road, which makes no sense.
No,
in
no.
flood zone.
It is, whatever
For
is the
X.
base, if you're in X, it's curve of the road.
Everybody
Everybody
else
else,
is
base
from
flood
base flood
elevation plus
elevation.
32.
Well, not base flood elevation, whatever we say they have to build,
Plus-
because we made
Right.
So
freeboard,
you
yeah.
could build a 47-foot tall house on the
As long as
beach
it was,
side.
as long as it was 15
Yes,
feet up.
that is,
Yeah.
I would say no on
that's DEP, that's not us,
Yeah.
that's not,
You don't have
yeah.
to-
Yeah.
And so
DEP
the-
doesn't
The bottom
have-
line is, unless you're in a flood zone, you build from the crown of the road up for 32 feet.
Yeah,
Well,
that's
it's-
correct.
But
Isn't it
this,
one
what you're
feet above
talking
the-
about is new.
The base flood elevation issue is new, yeah.
So do we concur on that then? So if you're in a flood zone, it goes from base flood elevation. If you're not in a flood zone, then it goes from 1 foot above the crown of the road. We good with that?
1 or 2, right? That's the fill in the blank.
Fill in the blank.
Don't have a choice. State law. Move on.
Just say, well, we kinda got preempted, might as well flip that one on.
Can we make that determination?
State law.
No.
Nope, can't make that determination either. Guess I should have talked to you before I represented these two.
I'll sign it 5 times. I've got the Attorney General opinion if you need a copy.
Okay, this is, should be unit developments. Right now, we don't allow commercial use in any residential area. And in order for a PUD to meet what a PUD definition is, it has to have some commerce in there. Because a PUD is a self-contained, like, little community where you've got recreation, green space, living space, some kind of businesses in there and stuff, because they're all self-contained. So we've gotta change, I would think we need to change the LDR to allow PUDs to have commerce in them.
We'd have to change the land use
Right,
to do that.
land use is changed to a PUD, right?
To be able to allow, if you were to have residential, you couldn't have commercial residential in the land use category.
But if we rezone it to a PUD, then it's whatever the PUD is.
Yes.
Yeah, you're right, is that authorized in the plan? I don't
No.
recall it. We need to have, let's bring you back on something.
Yeah,
because right now,
we
don't have-
need to make it allotment somewhere in there for a PUD to have
Sure.
commercial area.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we'd have to.
Unless, does anybody,
It's in here now.
in the audience have a problem with that?
Okay.
That But that means like where we have residences, they could put a bakery beside us.
It's in
Well, no, because a PUD is a unit in itself,
That's not a land use category.
It's not a part of it.
PUD,
yes.
There would be a section.
Yes.
I mean, if you remember
Right.
the boutique PUD that was gonna go in there,
Yes.
you know, they had a barber shop and they had, I guess, a
Spa.
spa and a restaurant and stuff like that in it, were all included inside of it, so everything was included in there.
Right,
That's what we're talking
yeah.
Well, we have tourist mixed use, which is authorizing it in the comp plan, and we have it in the, land development regulations, that you can have commercial, but it has limitations. We might wanna, talk about those limitations, given your earlier discussion about increasing commercial in that PUD,
about. Okay.
okay? Right here. Got it.
Mobile homes, where do we want mobile homes to go? If you've driven around, you see a lot of damage on single-family residential's been created by debris blown from mobile homes.
they're currently prohibited except in rustic sands and Angela estates. So the ones that are here.
Not
are
in the comp plan, they're not.
The ones that are here are grandfathered in, and if they're gone, they're gone.
Can't replace it.
The comp plan does not prohibit mobile homes.
You're not allowed to, limit manufactured buildings, but you can limit mobile homes. So I think you do have,
Well, a manufactured home, based on the way that I read the definition, is basically the same thing as a mobile home, because you bring it to site on wheels and then take the wheels off at site. Different from a modular home, which is constructed on site, which is on a foundation. Manufactured homes don't have to be on a foundation.
Yeah, Florida statute defines what a mobile
we're
home
using the statutory definitions of, manufactured buildings.
So what does Florida definition say?
They're,
They're built, I
It
think
has
it's.
to meet
It
Florida
builds
building
Florida
code.
Florida building code.
Yeah, but do they have to be on a foundation? That's the point that I'm making, is that manufactured homes are just modern mobile homes, generally is all they are. Built to higher standards. Different from a modular home, which has to be on a foundation, is much more secure, and is less likely to blow away. So the point I'm getting, do we want to limit where mobile homes and manufactured homes go to rustic sands or any licensed mobile home or RV park, rather than in the middle of somebody's residential neighborhood, right next to their house?
I think what Ray was saying, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but manufacturer and modular are the same category in Florida statute. Mobile home is separate. So manufactured and modular are together.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're only talking about mobile homes, and do we want to limit them, you know, keep them out of your general residential and only put them in mobile home parks?
But, yeah, you have that in your LDR.
Yeah, it's already in the LDR. It's, I don't know, don't think
Well,
it's
there's
that level of detail.
there's all kinds of mobile homes right now that aren't, and hopefully the 50% rule would apply to them, that if they want to have a mobile home, they've got to go to rustic sands, and they've got to build a house on the property it's currently on.
Thank you very much. My mobile home weathered the storm just fine, so it will be there for a while.
It's been manufactured on 19th Street on Brooklyn Road.
Okay, the current LDR requires, if you build, let me use a residence as an example. You build a residence in general commercial area or tourist land use area, the current LDR requires that home be built to the standards with the height, the density, the impervious area and everything else, which it would be as if you had built it in a low density residential area. So the question being, do you want to keep that in the LDR, or do you want to allow them to build to the standards in that land use area, which gives them a big advantage over people that have built where they're supposed to be? Because the impervious area is greater in the other zones, the height in some of them are greater. So the bottom line is it gives them an advantage over everybody else. Do you want to keep it the way it is, or do you want to change it and allow them to build to the standards in the zone they're in?
We discussed this at length. I remember bringing this up. And I pointed out that if you build a single-family residential home in a commercial zone, you actually, because the setback is 12 feet in the front instead of the 20 feet, you actually get 800 more square feet.
You have advantages that other people
That
building
other
residence,
homes do
single
not
family
have.
homes don't have.
And I don't believe that's fair. That's also impetus to give, to sell your commercial lot for residential dwellings, which defeats the purpose of zoning something commercial. So if you build a single-family home in any category, it should be built to single-family home standards, including all the setbacks. Otherwise, everybody that builds in commercial gets a big advantage.
Any other comments? Board?
I concur.
I concur.
I think generally we concur, so we'll keep the current language in the LDR. And that was the last issue I had. So
Speaking-
based on what we've discussed in the past and had issues,
I
problems.
would, speaking of setbacks, I would dearly love to see Mexico Beach revisited. Mary, you can help me with this. The shadow law. When you have, the higher up you go with a house, the larger your side setbacks used to have to be. I think we changed it in 2008. Because if you don't change the side setbacks, you throw more shade onto your existing neighbors, and they don't have the advantage of being able to move out of your shadow. We used to make you go up, what was it, 20, for every, you were above 25 feet, you had to go from 7.5 to 9.5 or 10, and then, so your side setbacks had to increase after a certain height, and I would love to see us go back to that.
What was that
That was my
called?
problem on one of them.
I always knew it as the shadow law, but I don't know what it's technically called.
No setback.
Did y'all do that on single family?
Yeah, because what we would get with these towering
No, yeah, I've seen it done
things,
on.
and the
condos.
existing one-story houses next to them were in perpetual shade. And we used to make them pull the taller houses in.
Gulf
And then-
County is still like that, they still have the 9.5 foot setbacks for any building over, it's either 20 or 25, 25 feet
Yeah, I don't remember,
high, I
it's
think.
somewhere along in there.
And I remember when that was changed, they were also talking about, accessing the top of the building for fire. It was an issue.
Mm-hmm.
And I think our fire department said, gosh, we can't reach those tall buildings when they're so close together. I absolutely agree with with Lisa about increasing that back to the 9.5.
Yeah, anyone else comment? I think that's something that we should look into.
I just have a comment. I wanted to ask about the sizes of the houses in Mexico Beach, because now there are no minimum sizes.
No.
No.
Should there not be a minimum size?
We discussed that and ad nauseum for several meetings. And I think we arrived at the general consensus that there shouldn't be a minimum.
So you can put a storage building and live in it?
No.
Well, no, we can't do
I
that.
mean,
We've also discussed that.
Yeah,
I mean,
but
basically.
you can have a
there's
tiny
no
house.
size, right, so
You can have a tiny house.
You can bring.
You
in
wanna do, have a
house.
tiny house as long as it
As long
doesn't
as
look like
you
a
have a
garage.
kitchen and bathroom and a bedroom and a living
But that
space.
is-
It's the solution for the townhome.
And no wheels.
But
No,
now-
Right.
No, because of the density.
But Ray, there are Florida Building Code requirements. It says minimum size for a kitchen, a bath. I remember seeing that somewhere, so it's not easy to put a tiny house on a lot because those functional areas in the home under Florida Building Code have to be a minimum size.
So then there would have to be a minimum size to the home.
Well, not necessarily, because they could exceed,
One bedroom or two bedroom. or
you know,
three
do the
bedroom.
very bottom kitchen space, or make the kitchen space larger, you know, and one of the others smaller.
What if it's a tiny home on wheels?
No wheels.
No.
It's a mobile home, it's on wheels, it's a mobile home.
Foundation park model. Just thought I'd ask.
But that's a good idea. I think that's something that y'all should look at when you do that. Anyone else have something they think that ought to be looked at in the LDR?
Are we going to do anything about pavers and the impervious? That's always a major issue and has grown more so. How much of your land can you cover with pavers and still maintain your impervious ratio?
Well, yeah,
I thought by definition pavers were impervious, or were not impervious, excuse me.
they have it's a certain factor, and it depends on the type of paper too. They do have more they do have a paper that's actually has more impervious. build.
So then that
Or
should be
pervious.
stated, because we got a lot of pavers that are impervious
Yeah,
and,
and that would count towards your overall impervious surface area.
but that
It
Yeah,
should.
but I agree with her, that needs to be covered in the LDR, so that,
it
Yeah.
has
They're
hardly
looking
ever
at-
been enforced.
Well, yeah, we just have to find.
and how do you enforce it, but bottom line is it
It
needs
goes
to
back
be
to
in
the
there,
impervious.
needs to be, yeah,
Yeah, it goes back to the impervious surface ratio.
yeah,
It's 50% or 40%,
Whatever it
and
is,
then we have to apply.
yeah.
It's never been enforced,
No.
except in maybe one instance.
Can I say something?
Sure.
We just built a house, finished it 6 months ago, did the pavers, and we had to meet all of the current city requirements and everything was pre-approved before we put it in, so we meet that requirement. So, are you saying that you wanna put something permanently in the LDR that requires that on top of what you?
Well, no, I think what she's saying is there are different kinds of pavers, some of them are impervious, some of them are pervious.
And everybody comes in and puts them in afterwards.
Oh, okay.
And
Like we
then
did.
you have- And then you have, I mean,
So you
then
end up with
have
80 or 90%
percent
of
of
your
your lot
land
covered.
covered.
There's also pervious concrete.
Yes.
Right, and that just needs to be clear.
Defined, yes.
And then some of us can only use
There is
40%, and
pervious-
some can use 90% of the lot.
Yeah, there is
Never
pervious,
enforced.
concrete.
There is.
Yeah, I mean, it's a factor, it's not a,
That's news to me.
No,
Like I said, it's expensive and you can pay more for it and you can watch the YouTube videos where they dump out a dump truck of water and it dissipates.
Oh, I'd love to see that.
has to be maintained though, to stay that way.
Okay, so that's another issue that we might wanna look at. Anything else? Okay, city manager, do you have any other issues?
We had a whole list of LDR
Just
issues
distributed last week.
Yeah.
besides.
Yeah, that list that we got's really nothing that we can work with until we get something from them to talk about.
Right. But
Yeah,
it-
that's
it-
just
it
a
comes
list of
with it.
things, yeah, that's just a list of things that we're gonna be looking at, in addition to the stuff you just mentioned. You know, and given our time frame, and we have a very limited time frame to do, I mean, you can't go through, I write LDRs all the time, but it takes months and months to
Yeah.
write an LDR.
That's why I'm glad you're doing it and we're not.
Well, I mean, we'll address as much as we can, that's why we tried to make a list of, you know, some of the things we saw right off the bat. And then I don't mind coming back, and we can, you know, if we have to address other stuff in the LDRs after the 90 days, we can. We wanna make sure we get everything that applies to the moratorium done now. But stuff like helping you with defining commercial areas and, you know.
Well, that's something we,
areas.
we can address at a future
Yes.
time. We need to
And
do
we
it,
will.
and I've been bringing this up for the last years. We definitely need to redo the map.
Yes, and
But now's not the time to do it. We got other more pressing problems right now.
we can definitely help you with that. later.
Okay, well, we appreciate that too.
So next week, will you guys have?
Yeah, we'll
some
have-
Drafts ready
Yep.
to start for the list that we came up with?
And what we're gonna do is bring some stuff next week, drafts, of changes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
We
if,
have them all by next week, but we'll have some.
yeah, so if you people, I mean, wanna come in next week too, have an opportunity, because we're gonna be talking about the LDR for a long time.
Yeah.
And if you want some input into it, it's best to do it now. Okay, so our meeting, I would say there's no requirement for any of us to be at the meeting, city council meeting tomorrow, because we're not addressing this. Okay, any other,
For clarification,
Yes.
new residential and the moratorium, and we've talked about modular. Could you do a modular conforming residence next week, or does that come after the moratorium?
If you're substantially damaged, you can't.
No, if you had zero damage.
You
If
can't
had
bring the
a
modular
whole
right
lot.
After.
That's what I wanted to understand.
Because the setbacks won't change.
any other business,
Elevation may change.
any other business to bring up before the board? Can I have a motion to adjourn? Second,
Second.
all in favor? Aye. You are, okay, you know, not a name. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for attending, I appreciate that.